When I started watching the NBA, the standard of greatness was Magic Johnson's Lakers and Larry Bird's Celtics. Between them, they won like every MVP, every championship, everything in the 80s. So when I was young and would go to the playground, normally what you would hear or what you would see, I guess, is people trying to do no look passes like Magic, or trying to knock down the three and leave their hand up in the air or hold up a finger before the shot even hit the rim like Bird did. And that was how we tried to imitate greatness. But then by the time I became a teenager, Michael Jordan was the new standard of excellence. So instead of no look passes, the guys on the team all wanted to glide through the air and take circus shots, to shoot all the time, what we used to call gunning, and put up the big scoring numbers, and to drive to the rim with their tongue hanging out and wagging just like Mike, like Mike. That was the commercial theme, I guess, of the 90s, the whole the Gatorade, the whole I wanna be like Mike. And it showed on the court, right? Because among my generation of NBA players, Kobe Bryant was the one that ended up looking the most like Mike. But you can see Mike's influence on really the whole generation. I mean, before Mike came through, I don't know if people remember this, but shooting guards used to just shoot, and they were normally a little smaller than they are now. Shooting guards used to be like 6'3", maybe 6'4". Athleticism wasn't the key thing that coaches were looking for. They were looking for shooters. And they also didn't really handle the rock that much. They were more of their name said it all for them. So, for my old heads out there, I'm thinking guys like Byron Scott, Danny Ainge, Joe Dumars, that's kind of what shooting guards look like before Jordan. But then Jordan, he was like this 6'6" athletic beast. He was more like Dr. J, who was a small forward in size, but then he had all that speed and ball handling ability. And so he would handle the ball more and really dominate the ball more. He would set up the offense for both himself and his teammates more than we used to see, and he really kind of changed the game in that respect. So, as a generation wanted to be like Mike, the wings that came after him all kind of played like him. A lot of them, there were always talk. There would always be talk in the 90s about who's the next Jordan, the next Jordan. We're looking for the next Jordan. And, you had a lot of cats come through that were going to be the next Jordan that, might have had the style, but they just weren't as good. Guys like, and this is way back for for anybody who wasn't living through the time, but there used to be this cat named Harold Miner. They called him Baby Jordan, and he tried, I would say, even more than Kobe to imitate Mike's style, but he didn't have his game. But eventually they did find that next generation, with Kobe and T-Mac and Vince Carter and Dwayne Wade. They were the class of their generation of high scoring wings, and they all borrowed, heavily from Jordan's game. So anyway, a few weeks ago now, Ray Allen officially retired. Some of you may have seen Jason and I did a clip on the best three-point shooters ever, and of course, Ray Allen's going to feature prominently. I think we concluded that maybe Steph Curry is currently ascending to the crown, but that he's taking the seat that Ray left warm. So, right after he announced his retirement, Jason and Chris Liss from RotoWire and I all had kind of this Twitter, debate about, well, who was better, Ray or Reggie Miller? Because Reggie Miller was the greatest three-point shooter before Ray, right? And so they were the natural comparison, at least historically. And I ended up writing an article on my blog, or the Hoops Lab, hoopslab.rotowire.com, that was comparing Ray and Reggie stylistically as kind of like the ideal historical comp as far as Ray's historical rival. And then I also wrote a lot about Ray compared to Kobe Bryant because it wasn't really so publicized, but the rumors were that Kobe and Ray just didn't like each other. So they were Kobe was kind of Ray's biggest rival in his generation. So I wrote about that. And But I wanted to go further, so I started working on a follow-up article comparing Ray and Reggie by the numbers, and not just against themselves, but also against the other great shooting guards of the last 30, 35 years. And then I looked at it and I decided to extend it beyond shooting guards to just primary scoring perimeter wings. So that included guys like Larry Bird from the 80s, and, moving forward, brought in, forward guards like Paul Pierce, who played mainly small forward, but I felt like he fit too. So I started comparing scoring efficiency using a stat called true shooting efficiency. And I compared that against scoring volume with points per 100 possessions. And I looked at 12 elite, perimeter scoring threats from the last 30 years or so. So that was Jordan, Ray and Reggie, of course, Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade, Tracy McGrady, Vince Carter, Paul Pierce, Clyde Drexler, Larry Bird, Joe Dumars, and Allen Iverson. And because you could argue that really that the playoffs are the real season, the most important season, and both Ray and Reggie tended to really step up their production in the postseason, at least in their primes. Reggie stepped up his scoring volume from the regular season to the postseason, and Ray stepped up his scoring efficiency from the regular season to the postseason. So I decided on this plot to show each player's playoff stats, instead of looking at their regular season stats. So, to the charts. Let's look at the old guys first. And I'm going to call the old guys the 80s babies, since all of them were rookies in the 80s. You see how the players kind of group on the chart? Bird, Dumars, and Drexler all group on the left side of the chart, and in the middle going up and down. And so what that tells us is that relative to this group of players that we're looking at, who are all kind of high volume scoring perimeter wings, these guys are relatively low scoring with a moderate scoring efficiency. Meanwhile, Jordan is off on an island on himself on the far right of the plot, a bit higher up, which says that he scored way more points than the other members of that group, but he also did it at a higher efficiency, which is, let's be honest, that's a big part of why to many he's the GOAT. He scored in ways that we had never seen before. Then, if you look at the top of the chart, Reggie Miller is equally by himself off on an island at the top, but towards the middle of the plot going left to right. So what that says is that he actually scored more points per possession in the playoffs than the other 80s babies besides Jordan, but that he did so at a way higher efficiency than anyone else, including Jordan, because of the way he took advantage of the three and free throws. So now let's add the guys from my generation to this chart. And, we'll call us Generation X. That's what they called us. So you see how Gen X groups on the chart? Kobe, Iverson, T-Mac, Vince, and Wade are all right in the middle, going left to right, but they're in the lower half of the chart, going up and down. Paul Pierce landed right in the group with the 80s baby category, which kind of makes sense. I mean, he landed right on top of Larry Bird as a scorer. And, Pierce has always played like an old man. He had an kind of an old man's game, like an old soul. And he played in Boston, and these days, or at least while he was playing there, towards the end, you got a lot of comparisons between him and Bird. So, so Pierce gets grouped in with the old heads. The other Gen X wings, they all wanted to score like Jordan, so they all had these high scoring volumes compared to the guys from the 80s. But even with Jordan as a template, they couldn't match Jordan's volume. And in trying to score more, and against maybe defenses that were even more packed in, because defenses got more sophisticated in the turn of the century with zones and stuff, they didn't have Jordan scoring efficiency either. So they were high volume, low efficiency. All of them really, except for Ray. So if you look where Ray ended up, you find that he's at the top quadrant right next to Reggie Miller. And that's really because both of them had weaponized the three-point shot in a way that nobody else in their particular generations were doing. And so they were able to score at a similar volume as the best non-Jordan perimeter scoring threats, but at this hyper efficiency that even Jordan never touched. So then fast forward to today. Generation X is getting old, you know. If you look here and, you know, in my comments, you know, section, you'll see my hair's starting to fall out. And, you know, Kobe and Ray just joined T-Mac and Iverson in retirement. And it really won't be long before the rest of this group follow. So now it's time to talk about the next generation, the millennials. And so if you look at the last 5 NBA seasons, there have been 5 players that finished first and or second in all 5 MVP races. Steph Curry, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Kawhi Leonard. That's your 5. So if that group would have grown up like Gen X, wanting to be like Mike, then when we add them to the chart, we'd expect to see them slot in either maybe more towards the right, closer to Jordan, or maybe on top of Gen X, being, you know, towards the right, but with more struggle and efficiency. But let's go ahead and add them to our chart. And when we do, we see that the millennials are not in the right quadrant with Jordan. They're not in the bottom quadrant with Gen X or in the left quadrant with the 80s babies. Instead, the current crop of MVP level perimeter scorers have playoff scoring volume efficiency almost exactly like Reggie and Uncle Ray. Reggie and Ray, they reached their hyper efficiency with that, you know, 3-pointer as a weapon. And then in Reggie's case, he also drew a lot of fouls because, you know, if any of you never watched him play, he had this ragdoll style. Every time he took a shot, he would throw his legs out. Then his defender would run into his legs. They'd call a foul. With the 3 and the drawn fouls, you know, Reggie and Ray were able to score at a more efficient rate than any of their peers. And with the rule changes of the mid-2000s and offensive-minded perimeter players of this generation that were kind of descended from that weaponized three-point shooting mindset, you know, it's fitting, I guess, that this current group of millennials slot up there in that upper quadrant with them. They're in the upper room. And that Steph Curry, who kind of slid into the throne that Reggie once sat in, that Ray once sat in, and now Steph occupies as the greatest three-point shooter in the world, is really fitting that his data point is right on top of Ray's and Reggie's on this chart, because it shows that they're very similar, at least as scorers. So while many still believe that Michael Jordan is the GOAT, and I'm not here to argue that one way or the other, but Generation X did grow up wanting to be like Mike, you know, imitating him on the basketball court, and that played out here when you look at the way Gen X scored. But while Dave Chappelle says that the millennials grew up shouting Kobe on the playground when they took shots, and of course, you know, Kobe is his generation's at least stylistic version of Mike. When you look at the way that the millennials score, it indicates that instead maybe they were standing at the three-point line, you know, jacking up shots, yelling Ray and Reggie instead of yelling Kobe or Mike. That they'd rather be like those super efficient long-range assassins in their playing style than to be like Mike. So thanks for listening. Check me out in the lab, in the Hoops Lab at hoopslab.rotowire.com, or follow me on Twitter at Professor Driz. That's Professor DRZ.